welcome to John Thompson Music, podcast number 1. My guest today is a professional guitar instructor, composer, producer with years of professional experience. He teaches private guitar students in New Jersey and also online. He could be reached at ronnashguitar.com. I'd like to welcome Mr. Ron Nash. Cool. So that's what drew you to like producing and all of that kind of stuff, huh? And getting the studio. Your father was into the high-end audio stuff, huh?
Honestly, I just did it to try it. I know, I'm like a novice. I'm half decent engineer. I'm really more player performer guy, but
right.
I could record stuff and I'm decent, but I'm not great at it. I'm good at it, but nothing great.
Actually, you produced some pretty cool tracks for me, and I've had a lot of fun in your studio, actually. Yeah. What about like during high school and stuff? Like, what kind of music were you into in high school? I mean, were you into the real heavy thing, progressive thing?
Well, I have to tell you,
the Black Sabbath stuff, or
definitely was into that. But my probably like my first really like band that I loved was BTO. I loved Bachman Turner Overdrive because they were great songs. The songs were great. You're a little kid, so you're looking for catchy songs. I'm not looking for, most mind-blowing, virtuoso playing. I just like songs, you're a kid,
right.
But they were great. I loved them doing their, they had like 4 or 5 killer albums right in a row.
Right.
And that was probably my favorite.
They had a lot of hits. Right?
Oh, yeah. It was probably like BTO. I really loved Deep Purple and like early Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult. Like that's kind of a lot of, I think Blue Oyster Cult I kind of got into because my mother's stepbrother actually, they were much younger than my mother. He was like 20 years younger than her. But he had all that stuff. He was a few years older than me. So he turned us on to like Tyranny and Mutation and like the second Blue Oyster Cult album, then all the Deep Purple and Uriah Heep. That's the kind of stuff, heavy and, not too poppy, but I got a soft spot for the poppy tunes,
Yeah, speaking of the poppy tunes, let's back up just a little bit. What about when the Beatles came out? What were your...
Well, when they came out, I was 2 years old. So
I don't.
But actually, going back to like my father getting the cassettes,
right?
The 4 cassettes that he brought home the first time, I think it was Partridge Family album, Abbey Road, Johnny Cash, like Gold Hits or something, and Creedence, Willie and the Poor Boys. So probably Willie and the Poor Boys, Creedence, and Abbey Road. We obviously beat those tapes to death.
Yeah. That's very cool. So getting back to going forward again here. Sorry about that, but do you think that those guys like Blue Oyster Cult and those guys in concert? I really didn't get a chance to see them or anything. Do you think they were like the first real like jam bands? Like, because I know those guys were awesome musicians and I know that they could jam out. Did they like jam out on their stuff in concert, or did they kind of just, keep it stock like, the way it was recorded?
No, I've seen Blue Oyster Cult definitely over 100 times, and they jam, but they don't do like like an Allman Brothers or Dead thing where they really play long. Like Buck might play, say, 2-minute solo or something at the end of a tune, just jam out, maybe 2-3 minutes, and a lot of their live stuff, they're actually only like one of the few real heavy bands, like, metal and the prog rock stuff is pretty much more like classical, where it's like it's a composition. You don't have a lot of room,
Right.
to jam on it. But they were the only ones. He would just jam at the end of the tunes. They take that last riff,
Right.
beat it to death, and he would just freaking go bananas, And I mean, like a little kid, loving the lasers and the big Godzilla and shit.
Oh yeah.
I love those guys,
The
man.
shows back then were so a lot of the shows were so theatrical. What do you think? Do you think um yeah, Alice Cooper, do you think he was he the first theatrical guy, or was it Bowie, or I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, there was people who dabbled in it, but I mean, it was actually, you'd have to say it was Alice Cooper that really
Right.
was the premier guy. Even Zappa like gave him his first contract because Zappa's like seen that he's nuts. But Alice actually, what's kind of funny, I don't think that many people know about Alice, is that like Milton Berle and all those guys that like the vaudeville stuff,
Uh-huh.
he would bring guys to see Alice because it reminded him of the old vaudeville burlesque days. I doubt those guys were into the music, but they loved his show,
Yeah, and
which
he
is,
came out with like what, with the top hat and the cane and all of that.
well, that was later. That was the
Oh, that was
Billion
like,
Dollar Babies tour. So
okay.
yeah, I actually have that. I have a German cable show that has the whole movie of that. It's the Billion Dollar Babies tour movie. It's really cool.
Yeah. All right. So that's the kind of stuff, that you were doing in high school, listening to that. What were you know, name some guitar players. Let's talk about some guitar players that around that time, around the high school time. I know um I was into like the John McLaughlin and the some of the hotter guitar players like that. What were your thoughts on that? Like after Jimi Hendrix, for me, it was kind of John McLaughlin.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, not to beat it to death, but I am a couple years younger. I
Right.
mean, just the 3 or 4 years makes a difference in that. I mean, I
Especially during high school and that time, yeah.
oh big well, because I mean, we really all kind of grew up with WABC playing like, I mean, they'd play a Black Sabbath song and then a Sonny and Cher song, which
Right,
is
yeah.
so you just liked songs, you liked music. You didn't really categorize it too much. But the early days, I'd have to say Richie Blackmore, you know,
Yeah.
one I actually, if you want to get into like this evolution of the guitar stuff, I would go like, you have that, the 50s, 60s era. I mean,
Right,
great
right.
players. I
Yeah, let's
mean,
talk about that. Yeah.
I think a lot of those, I mean, killer players. You got Chet
Right.
Atkins and all those, Carl Perkins, totally
Yeah.
different
Oh,
style. I mean, I think after George Harrison, the only other like rock dude that, besides like a Brian Setzer or those kind of rockabilly guys, like Steve Howe, really was
right.
one of the later guys that just, him, maybe Page a little bit, and Rick Emmett. They took some of those older kind of ideas, weren't always based on bluesy stuff, in other words,
Mhm.
you know. Well, like McLaughlin there. I mean, that's totally different ballgame.
Yeah. Let's talk about your book a little bit. I mentioned in the intro that Ron is a wonderful guitar teacher. He's been teaching for a long time. I'm sure he has many different thoughts on teaching and all of that kind of stuff. So, do you have a copy of your book there, Ron, that you can like put in front of the
There's a
camera?
shameless plug, but this is actually the
Yeah.
old cover. I'd have to run down to my basement to get one with the new cover.
All
But
right.
this is the first, and actually, let me see. I might have the second book over here. If I don't, I might have. If I don't have the book, I have the workbook that goes along with it. Let me see. Oh yeah. Sorry about that, folks, but the shapes of things. This is the
Uh,
workbook to the other book showed the shapes of things. I really just am talking about chord patterns, scale patterns, arpeggio patterns, because luckily fretted instruments we can visualize. We don't have to. I mean, of course, if you're a good reader, that's kind of, brings you to a whole new level. But we can learn stuff from charts and tabs and just little more visual stuff than actual having to read.
yeah. So what are your thoughts on teaching? Like what's your teaching philosophy? I mean, do you teach everybody differently, or do you have like kind of a standard thing, or do you try to uh more or less deviate from your program to keep some of these, people interested, or
Well, I mean, that I mean, you teach, there's certain fundamental stuff. It doesn't matter what you like. You kind of have to know. I mean, if you play
right.
a D chord in a Madonna song or a Metallica song, it's still just a D chord,
That's
So
true.
you do need to know a lot of the fundamentals, and then you bust it into stylistic things, I mean, and as well as anybody, without you have to have a personality on the instrument. You got to learn all the basics, and then just you know put all that stuff you stole from everybody else, and hopefully it comes out as you.
Yeah, I got that for sure. That's for sure.
Well,
Yeah, there's definitely basics. I mean, there's things, and a lot of times, a lot of times people will come and they'll say, well, I don't want to learn music theory. I don't want to learn how to read. I just want to learn how to uh, accompany myself. And, if somebody said that to you, then what do you think you would just get them into? Mostly just being able to play some good chords and stuff, or
I mean, that's a good question. But if you have like an adult guy always wanted to play guitar, maybe the kids are out of school and he's got some more time to himself, and they just want to learn some simple songs to strum along at a party. Have a hot dog and a beer, play like a Neil Young song or something. And so it's different levels. I mean, I taught a kid, Abe Ovadia, who won the Manhattan 2016 Jazz Guitarist of the Year.
wow.
So I mean, I'm sure he blows me away playing jazz, but it's like I taught him all the fundamental stuff. And actually, he was taking lessons from somebody else at Musicians Workshop, whose name I won't mention. But the father, seeing that, I had the book out and like I really had a method, I have landmark spots when I'm teaching out of the book. Like we'll do an X number of pages, then I'm going to stop. And if you like, Leonard Skinner, I'll show you a Skinner song using those chords.
Right.
If you like what Foo Fighters, I'll show you a Foo Fighters song with those chords, So, I mean, teaching it really, you do have to teach in the fundamentals. I try to keep moving them along, so you don't dwell on anything and then come back and review. But, I mean, how many people you taught? Some people,
Yeah.
it's their life, and other people it's just, hey, it's kind of something fun I always wanted to do, let me try it.
Right, exactly. There's all kinds of levels, so it's good to be flexible and just to be able to teach people what they want to learn. Um, I had a student come to me one time and say, "Oh, my last teacher was like, you must keep your finger here and do this," and like slapping them with a ruler and stuff. So um, that's how I wound up getting the student. And speaking of teaching, let's go back a little bit and talk about your musical education. Like, what was your uh, who was your first teacher? And
Actually, you may even have heard of the dude. I know he's a big like a jazzy dude. And speaking of musicians workshop, Joe Striff knew the guy, and going back, even my dad had his keyboard playing buddy. His keyboard buddy Joe Chambers recommended this guy Joe Skarzinski that would come to my house. He was a jazz guy,
Wow.
Berkeley grad, and I studied with him for a couple of years, like maybe 4 or 5 years. And he was one of those cut off jean shorts, sandal wearing, like beatnik kind of jazz guys.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Cool.
love that guy, man. And I know he just was Joe was telling me, Joe Striff was telling, he went to some jazz jam and he knew Joe Skarzinski because if you remember, if you know Joe's Striff story, he actually opened the first music shop he had at Freehold, because Freehold just sold pianos. And Joe rented out a part and started selling guitars and stuff. So
Ah,
so he knew Joe Skarzinski from them days. But it's like this dude, he was cool. He was make you read out of the Berkeley book. Then he'd give you like some impossible rhythm to read, and you had to have it. It's like 2 or 4 measure thing, and when you're young, it's like this thing looks
I
impossible.
know. It's like, what is that chicken scratch on the page over
Yeah.
there? You know?
but, but he would give you stuff like that. And I remember like asking him, go back to BTO. I'm like, Joe, man, show me this solo. He's like, you know what? Figure out the chords, figure out what scale those chords are in, and then figure out the solo. He would never show me a freaking solo.
I know, right? That's like my later teachers when they would say like, "Oh yeah, go home and transcribe this Charlie Parker solo," and I'd look at them like, "Are you kidding me? Like really? Like I can't do that."
Oh yeah. Hey, you might be able to figure it out, but writing it on paper
Yeah.
is not that easy, man.
Uh, yeah, that's for sure. That's all kinds of stuff there. Um, yeah, let's go back. Speaking of Joe Striff, we'll tell the people that Joe is a wonderful friend of ours that owns Musicians Workshop. And I know you taught there for many years. How many years were you at the workshop?
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I don't
At
even want to
least
say, right? A long time.
put
Yeah.
it this way, I used to get there. My mother would drop me off there on her dinosaur, and then I would. Dude, I've been there like I'm the only one
Yeah,
that taught
no,
at every place. I've been there probably over 30 years.
yeah. Well, I remember that's when I met you, actually. I think I met you at the Musicians Workshop. Uh, a wonderful bass player, a friend of mine by the name of Dave LaRue. Some of you probably have heard of him. He's a wonderful bassist that played with Steve Morse. Anyway, when he left teaching at this Musicians Workshop, I came in and started teaching a little bit. And I believe that's where we met. And then you were in a band called Hung Jury at the time. You
The
want to talk
well
about
hung
that?
jury. Come on, man, get that
Yeah,
right.
the Well Hung Jury. You
But
want to
no,
talk about
yeah,
those crazy times in Sayreville with that band? I mean, that was a progressive band, you would say, right?
yeah. Well, we did. I mean, that was cool because the keyboard player Scotty would well, he was really a bass player most of the time, but he could play keys, and then Frankie, the other guitar player, would play bass. So we could do a set like of Kansas, Journey, REO Speedwagon, that kind of stuff, and then once we're back to 2 guitars and bass, we did like Queensryche, Judas Priest, Rush, a lot of that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it was just fun. It was it was one of those bands where we all got along because we all liked the same stuff.
Yeah, it's good to have some, guys that are all wanting to go in the same direction. I mean, it's gotta be that way. If a couple of guys want to go this way and that way, then that's when it
Yeah, well, you
doesn't
just
really last. But like you guys, like when I met you, I said, man, I got to go hear this guy's band. So, uh, yeah, very professional sounding, all great musicians and things.
yeah, it was
So, So after you were after him, who was your next teacher? Was it what else did you do? Did you
Well,
study?
actually, you probably know the guy. I did the lessons with Joe Skarzinski, and I always like Rick Emmett from Triumph. I always did like a finger picking piece, and like Steve Howe. So I studied for maybe a little less than a year with Lou Malia.
Yeah, he's a great classical guy, right? Classical teacher. I remember wanting to study with him when I was younger.
Yeah,
Can
he
you
was.
talk about him a little bit?
I really only studied. It was probably a little over 6 months, maybe. Definitely not a
Hmm.
year, but he was just kind of a strict guy. He'd show you stuff. He would always write like little tips on the side because it's finger picking, like flat, make sure this is 90 degrees, and
Yeah,
do
how to
this. Like he'd take like even a measure or like a line of a tune and put like repeat signs in the beat, and then he'd write do this 10 times. Like, just it was more like a right hand exercise than a fret hand exercise.
yeah,
So
so you had some of that classical thing. I remember listening to Yes and Genesis and all of that when they came out, and like they were like my favorites. And you know, I'd listen to some of the stuff that Steve Howe did, and I was like, wow, And even even Jimmy Page, right, from Led Zeppelin, man, he had some chord things going on there during that when they were doing the folkier type stuff,
but it was
acoustic
weird.
stuff, I should say.
Well, that more Celtic folky stuff,
Right.
but that was where I kind of parted with that because I suck at weird tunings and slide, like two things like I always wish I was good at, but I never wanted to detune my guitars and I never wanted to play slide. So it's like, hey, some guys are great at it. It never worked for me, man.
Well, you know what they say, you are what you eat, and and everybody's different. That's what's so great about music.
Yeah, well,
So while we're on the education thing, man, you went out to LA for a while, right?
yeah, I was there 84 to 86. I did a 12-week stint. It was at Musicians Institute, the GIT, Guitar Institute of Technology, and studied with some great guys there. I mean, we saw, like, at the time they were kind of up and comers. Was Frank Gambale was there, Scott
Mhm.
Henderson,
Oh, wow.
um, Jimmy Herring was a student. He wasn't teaching or anything. And Paul Gilbert was a student there that same time that I was down there. And
Wow, Paul Gilbert. Oh man.
it was
And Jimmy
like,
Herring. Jimmy Herring has becoming one of my new favorite guys right now.
yeah, he's
He's playing
amazing.
with a band right now called Widespread Panic that I enjoy a lot.
Yeah, he's done a lot, that guy, man.
Oh,
He's awesome.
yeah.
Well, the guy that I, I I remember when they did the 12-week to summer course graduation, the teacher Steve Travata is just badass. He's like if you combined like Brian Setzer, Albert Lee, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and they were good. That's how
Yeah,
bad.
he's like the best guitar player that hardly anybody has ever heard of.
You
And
ever
he's
you
this
ever hear
guy
any of that?
that's unbelievable, right?
Oh,
No, I never even heard of him. And I'm sure if if you say it's unbelievable, he's got
dude, they did him and they had a full band. There was a couple of the teachers, a couple students, but it was Steve Travata and Jimmy Herring was playing, and they did Somewhere Over the Rainbow, but every verse was like one was like a salsa, one was jazz, one was country. Like they just kept reggae, they just kept changing the groove, but it was still the same changes. It was like I was like, this is so freaking
wow.
cool. You know?
Yeah.
It was. I mean, they probably did like 15 verses.
Thank you for tuning in to John Thompson Music. If you found value in this content, please leave a comment. Hit the subscribe button. Go to my YouTube channel playlists and look under JT Live. That's where you'll find all my free stuff, bass lessons, guitar lessons, video podcasts, and the like. Until then, peace, love, and music for all.